So what that was back in that day is if you had a financial debt to someone, you would be sold into slavery to them until you could work it off for them. And sometimes the debt was so great that you could never work it off. And that's a horrible predicament to be in, but there was a provision of a kinsman redeemer who could purchase you back, who could buy you back from slavery back into freedom. So that was a really great thing. And another thing a kinsman redeemer could do and would do was he could marry the widow of his brother. It really had to be like a close relative, which is a little weird when we talk about that in our day and age, but he would do that, and the Lord provided for that so that the widow would not be destitute. The widow would be provided for. But not only that, your family and your clan and your heritage and your lineage was really, really important in that culture, that your name would not be erased from the earth. So if the widow had no children, then when her husband died, that was it. That's like your name is done. So God provided for that, and also, again, so they would not be destitute. So not just anyone could be a kinsman redeemer. And I'm going to add some scriptures to this later on, but a kinsman redeemer needs to be near of kin, able to redeem, meaning free of calamity or any kind of need himself, need of redemption, willing to redeem, and redemption was only complete when the price was fully paid. Okay, and we're going to get into that a little bit deeper later. So Boaz is approached by Ruth, which is kind of odd, but that's how they did it. So Ruth approaches Boaz and asks him if he would redeem her at that little scene that we talked about last week at the threshing floor. Remember the threshing floor? We talked about that. We talked about how the threshing floor at times is how sometimes God allows us to be at the threshing floor and allows circumstances to kind of pressure us a little bit to try to break off the carnality, to break off the flesh from the good grain, from the good seed that's inside. Okay, so that we talked about that last week. Let's see. So when we approach our Redeemer, and all of us in this room, as I'm looking around the room, have approached our Redeemer, that Jesus was not only willing, but he was able to redeem us. And so Ruth goes up to Boaz, asks if he would redeem her, but Boaz realizes that there's a problem here, that there's a nearer kin, a nearer relative than what he is. And so he's going to fix this little problem before he can go ahead and marry Ruth. So what he does, he wastes no time. He gets up the next morning, and he goes to the gate of the city to meet up with the nearer kin, which they never mention what his name is, just the nearer kin. So the very next day, he goes to the gate of the city. Now, the gate of the city in that day is a place where all legal business was transacted. So it's kind of like our city hall or town hall. Like if you need a legal transaction to be done, that's where you would go. And so Boaz, he's a prominent figure in that land. He gathers, and we're going to read that in a little bit, he gathers 10 men, okay, and while he's at the gate to witness this transaction. Now, in the Jewish culture, these 10 men are called a minyan, okay, and a minyan is 10 men. It is like a quorum, like we would call a quorum, which is the least required amount of people at that legal transaction, whatever was going on. So Jasper, the minyan, is not little yellow people, okay? We like the little yellow people. Jasper likes the Minions movie, and so do I, but I don't tell anybody. So anyway, that's a minyan, but it's not that kind of minyan. This is 10 men that were needed in a legal transaction. Okay, so let's get into our text, which is Ruth 4, 1 through 4. Boaz went up to the gate, sat down there, and behold, the unsuspecting close relative of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Come aside, friend, sit down here." He's got this all worked out. So he came aside and sat down, and he took 10 men, again the minion, of the elders of the city, and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. And then he said to the close relative, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, sold the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. And I thought to inform you, saying, buy it back in the presence of the inhabitants and the elders of my people. If you redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not redeem it, then tell me, so I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and then I am next after you." So the guy says, "I will redeem it." And Boaz, I'm sure his heart sank, and he was like, bummer. But he's got this whole thing thought through thoroughly, okay? So only so far the land has been mentioned, and the other guy's like, "Ooh, land, okay, yeah, I'll redeem that. That sounds pretty good." However, when Boaz presents the rest of the purchase, because remember, a kinsman redeemer has to completely, fully redeem the whole transaction. So perhaps the idea of marrying a Gentile doesn't sound so great, because he mentions, the Moabite Ruth, or the Moabitess Ruth, or the fact that the land he had to pay to redeem would eventually, in this culture, if they had had children, it would end up going to Ruth. He'd pay money to buy land, but eventually it would not be his. Or perhaps his current wife or fiancée would slap the chutzpah out of him if he agreed. So he just is like, no, let's see what happens. Verse 5. Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance." And the close relative said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it." And Boaz said, "Hallelujah," and did a happy dance in his head right there, because, well, maybe not, but he was quite happy about how this all turned out. Now, verse 7, this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm anything, one man would take off his sandal and give it to the other, and this was a confirmation in Israel. And a lot of this had to do with being a landowner. If you purchase land, part of your declaration that this is a land that is yours is that you would walk around it. But if you refused to purchase the land, you would take off one of your sandals, signifying, like, I can't really walk. So anyway, so he gives the sandal to the other guy, to Boaz. I wanted to pause and take a look at the origin of this whole taking off your sandal thing, okay? And this gets a little odd, right, in our culture. I think in any culture, let me just read this to you. Okay, Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10 says this: "If brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not be married to a stranger outside the family. Her husband's brother shall go into her, take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And it shall be that the firstborn son which she bears will succeed to the name of the dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out of Israel." We just kind of talked about that. That was to perpetuate the name. Keeping your legacy, right, your heritage, your land, which was very important to the culture. "But if the man does not want to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate to the elders and say, 'My husband's brother refuses to raise up a name to his brother in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother.' Then the elders of his city shall call him and speak to him. But if he stands firm and says, 'I do not